Hi, today's the 2nd of February 2018 in New Zealand, and today I want to talk about the myth that birth trauma is the worst type of trauma. Sometimes it's referred to as TABS, trauma after birth syndrome. So, women have given birth forever. Have women been traumatized by giving birth? Yes, they have. Are there different types of trauma? Yep, there are. And mostly they fall into two groups. If a mother dies, she isn't traumatized, but her family is. If a baby dies, a mother is traumatized, as is her family. But you have to remember that up until after the Second World War, when immunizations and antibiotics became widespread, every family and every society had an expectation that they would lose between 20 to 30% of their children from birth to the age of 5. Any cemetery you go into that has old tombstones, you'll find a huge number of graves with those aged children. So families were traumatized. No one wants to lose a child. However, it was common, and so there was an accepted societal expectation that we would lose children and have more. The other way that women are traumatized is that they feel out of control when they give birth. There are women who believe that the natural pain of labor contractions are going to kill them. They're going to die. And they feel that way because it's so out of their control. We have no control to determine when the next contraction is going to happen, how long it's going to last, or how intense it's going to be. And if we have a birth that goes on and 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 on, we both get tired, we get dehydrated, we don't eat, we despair, we feel the baby's never going to come out of us, and we feel overwhelmed. And that can happen at the other end of the spectrum. If our labor is shorter than 6 hours and very intense, we can feel that we're having an acute death experience because the contractions are so intense, so long, and so close together. So lots of women have felt traumatized by birth in the past. But there hasn't been as much focus on the birth as there has been on having children. Which means that people whose babies died at birth felt less traumatized than those whose babies died at 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. And children still die now. But by far, families will tell you that they are much more traumatized by an older child dying than a newborn, even though it's very sad when a newborn dies. And that's the same for a miscarriage. Women can be very traumatized by having a miscarriage, particularly if they've had more than one. So we have to take a look at the history of birth trauma, which has always existed, and how people have coped with it, which is basically the focus hasn't been so much on the birth as on having children. And so we have to understand that something shifted, because now the focus is on the trauma from birth. And I gave birth first in 1970. Now, I don't know every woman in the world who gave birth at the same time that I did, but we were a generation of people. And so what we said to one another, what the news was, what the sense we had of one another was that birth was birth was birth. What happened, happened. Most of us in the United States, the vast majority of us went into hospitals where we had standard procedures that most of us didn't like. But it happened. That was what it was. It was like going to a dentist appointment. It was like, I don't know, having a thing. So it was what it was. And we came out of that, having that experience, and we had a baby. And so we raised our children. When I gave birth last in 1982, that had shifted. And that had shifted dramatically, and that shift increasingly shifted in through the 90s, in through 2000, and up to today. We rarely saw or heard one another talk about shame, blame, guilt, disappointment, or anger around childbirth. We accepted what we didn't like. We didn't expect the birth of our baby to be a highlight experience in the same way that we planned a wedding that was supposed to be this wonderful experience. We knew that birth was messy. We knew that it was painful. We knew it was difficult. We knew it was hard work. We knew we would get through it. And we knew that we would either get through it with a healthy mother and baby or something unfortunate would happen. And we accepted that unfortunateness because we were still very close to the memory of people that existed prior to immunizations and antibiotics. But by the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s, the focus, the choice-focused trend in childbirth, this is what I want, this is what I don't want. We were told birth is this natural thing that women in traditional communities just do easily and the outcome's good, and that the medical profession has stolen birth from us, that's stolen our empowered birth experience. That was all an illusion. I'm sorry, it was an illusion. I've worked for many, many years in third world countries. I haven't worked in every third world country, but I've worked in a lot, not about birth. That's okay. But people talk about birth. You understand how they feel about pregnancy and birth. And when there is no medical care around, every culture has a health system which focuses intensely on pregnancy and birth and the newborn period up to the age of 5, because they know that this is when women and children are at the greatest risk. They accept that. Are they traumatized? They grieve. But do you know, in many cultures, they don't even name their children until the children smile at 6 or 7 weeks, because they don't believe that they really are present. So they have a detached experience. They have an acceptance that their children might die. They love them, they care for them, they mourn them when they die. But they don't have this TABS, this trauma after birth syndrome, to the level that we do in modern cultures, where the expectation is that they, the midwife or the obstetrician or the hospital or the staff, give you this perfect birth. That's what the expectation is. Now, when I've talked to women of this newer generation about why they are traumatized at birth, honestly, some of the first things they say is, well, my husband was an idiot. So why are they traumatized by that? Or, I was given a rough internal. Why are you traumatized by that? Or, I didn't get what I wanted. I was very clear that I didn't want this and I felt pressured. And why are you traumatized by that? You can be angry. You can be disappointed. You can be pissed off. That's fine. But why are you traumatized by it? And when I mean traumatized, the characteristics of people who feel traumatized by their birth are that they don't bond with their baby. They get depressed. They withdraw into themselves. They feel incomplete. So what would cause that extreme reaction? Well, at present, it's very, very small things. And that's what's, I don't know how to say it. It's confusing. It's amazing. It's bewildering. And we have to ask of ourselves as women, why are we permitting this to happen? Why do we permit the birth to be so important that small things that we consider to be big things that then leave us damaged. So it falls down to these categories. I didn't get what I wanted. A lot of life is that. They didn't do it to me in a respectful manner. I wasn't given a choice. Now, are these upsetting things? Absolutely. I'm 73 now. How many times in my life have I not been given a choice of lots of things that I wanted? How many times have people been rude to me or disrespectful to me? How many times have people been aggressive or unpleasant to me? Lots. We all live through that. And yes, sometimes we do feel depressed. And sometimes we feel angry. And sometimes we want to curl up in a ball because we feel sad and embarrassed and hurt and injured. However, we are letting the birth rule us, and we are doing it without the skills to counter all of those experiences. Because I grew up during this period where there was a high societal expectation that we become skilled. And as I've said in previous talks on debunking the myths, what was sad in hindsight about that period was those skills, Lamaze, Bradley, and Grantley Dick Reed, those wonderful, caring male obstetricians that developed the first set of skills that could be used universally, even though there were a lot of techniques and they didn't work and they didn't adjust and they weren't sustainable. But there was the beginning effort to say that women can use skills to improve their birth experience. But those three men focused these skills on achieving three goals: a natural birth, a pain-free labor with less medical care. And after a generation of trying to get these skills to achieve these goals, that didn't happen. And that was the primal mistake of this. And this is what we're trying to heal now. Every pregnant woman is going to give birth one way or another. And every birthing woman can use skills to birth her baby, no matter where she births, no matter who is with her, no matter what happens to her or around her. And when women are skilled to birth their babies, they can have horrible births. People can do terrible things to them. They don't like it, but they are not left traumatized. And why is that? Because they focus on using their skills to meet the challenges that they're faced with. Birth isn't any different than any other activity, except it's very different, but it isn't really. If you have a traumatic experience, if you have skills to meet the challenge that it takes to move through that traumatic experience, you will not be left traumatized. It doesn't mean you won't remember trauma. It doesn't mean that you won't feel sad or grief or anger or all those things. But if you use skills, you will eventually move on. And we have to look around the world at people who have lived in horribly traumatic situations, whether it's Rwanda, the Bosnian War, Iraq, Syria, the tsunami in Indonesia. Think about it. The world is full of traumatic, long, extended, the Boko Haram girls, long, extended traumatic experiences. Some people are left terribly traumatized, but those who recover use skills, and those who use skills to get through the trauma are more likely to recover after a period of time. And this is why our charitable trust in New Zealand, Common Knowledge, and the Birthing Better families that developed these skills in the early 1970s, and these skills that have now been used globally by tens of thousands of families, We rarely hear of people being left with trauma. They've had challenging births. They've had sometimes very sad births. They mourn, they grieve, they work through the process. And often they use the skills they've learned in Birthing Better to work through the process. Because sometimes it just takes time. But there needs to be another side of that. Dr. Phil talks about this as well when he works with people who are grieving the loss of a child, and they may have other children in the family. And he will often say, you know, how much you mourn is not a reflection of how much you loved. And that child or that person that died doesn't want to be remembered by having you grieve the rest of your life. That's not how they would have liked to have lived their life. And that other child in the family is having to live with you grieving all the time. You're tearing the fabric of the living child's life away from them because you are grieving the loss of another. I've worked with many families that have had traumatic births, and I've worked with many families who have lost children. It's sad. It is. Hard births are hard. And we've used skills to protect ourselves, to meet the challenges, to aid in the recovery. And we have grown. We have matured. We have deepened. We've become more empathetic. We've become more caring as we work through that process. But the one thing all of us know is that we've allowed ourselves joy and happiness. We've given that joy and happiness to those who love us. We haven't stayed in a state of paralysis and depression where people around us are trying to figure out what to do to help us get better. We've taken responsibility for ourselves. Because crap can happen to us, but it's what we do with that. And right now, too many women are permitting themselves to stay perpetually traumatized to the birth of their children and not getting on with life, and their children and their partners are suffering from that, which means they've just spread the trauma. And that's what's sad. So how can you help us grow a skilled, focused birthing population where everybody learns skills? Sure, we'd like them to learn the Birthing Better skills, but there are wonderful skills-focused resources out there. We just want everyone to go into birth being skilled and everyone to use their skills to birth their baby, no matter what kind of birth, where it is, what happens. From home alone to pressured cesarean, much less planned cesarean, in which you're quite happy to do it. We want you to prepare your body, get the pleasure out of doing that, and use skills on the way to the hospital while being prepped and in surgery. We want you to use skills around birth professionals who will praise you for doing that. We want your partners to have the skills to know how to help you so that you can work together as family to this child. And we want you to have the living memories for the rest of your life of what it means to have been a skilled birthing mother and a skilled birthing father or other. So, like our Facebook page, share this video with other people, comment, participate in this social dialogue. Help us to help you help yourself by becoming skilled. And share this with friends and relatives. It matters. And if you want to get in touch, email us at info@birthingbetter.org with your questions. And I am available for one-on-one consultations as well. Just go to birthingbetter.org. So see you later, and we'll talk about more myths around childbirth. This was an important one. Bye-bye.